Some women are delicate flowers, others as tough as nails. A woman of faith finds a new form of worship.
She was the good girl, and she meets the bad boy.
A matriarch rules with an iron rod.
Don't yell or I'll make it worse for you.
She did it because it made her feel powerful and it made her feel good.
And a seductress lures men and women into her web.
She put him through the ringer, but I mean, he loved her. He loved her throughout.
These deadly women want their own way at any cost. They desire total control. In Greenville, South Carolina, 2006.
Hey, Carmen.
19-year-old Carmen Major is devoted to her faith.
Carmen was described as a really good kid. She did well in school,
Are you helping at next week's charity run?
and she was a trusted member of her church.
I've got to go.
She was well educated and had a really good future ahead of her.
I'll try.
Carmen has always been a great help to her local pastor. But she has a new man in her life, her husband, ex-con Clarence Jenkins.
What Carmen lacked was experience with men. And when she met Clarence, he swept her away.
She was the good girl, and she meets Clarence, who was definitely the bad boy.
He had a number of run-ins with law enforcement, had somewhat of a prior record.
Got busted.
Again?
Petty crime isn't his only sin. Clarence is having an affair.
Clarence became infatuated with Grace Davis and ultimately had a romantic relationship with Grace.
Such blatant cheating would destroy most relationships. But not the Jenkins.
That's when Clarence said, I think we should all be together as one family.
I hereby pronounce that I, Clarence Jenkins.
Carmen agrees to turn this menage a trois into a marriage.
They actually performed a ceremony representing their love for each other with rings that he gave Carmen and Grace, and they all made a commitment to the family unit.
And then they call themselves the organization. It's Clarence, it's Grace, it's Carmen, together forever.
Until Clarence's criminal life catches up with him.
So he winds up in prison, and what happens then?
I like this.
Me too.
Grace and Carmen, they're at home, and they start looking at each other and think, what do we need him for?
For the next 3 months, the women become inseparable.
During that time, Grace and Carmen began a romantic relationship among themselves.
I never want to let you go.
When Clarence is released from prison, he rejoins the party.
Sure is good to be back home.
It's good to have you back.
When Clarence came back, he realized that the relationship between Grace and Carmen had began.
I'm gonna make this a real homecoming.
He forgives them. Look, I was gone, you did what you had to do, but we're back now in the organization, it's the three of us.
But there are 2 other people in the organization, Grace's children. And soon, things become complicated.
I gotta leave. But I need you.
I can't risk my kids.
She wanted to have full custody of her children. And our Department of Social Services was not going to allow her to raise her 2 children in the atmosphere in which she was currently living.
What's up?
Parents, I'm leaving.
Grace wanted to be with her children and get her life cleaned up and do the right thing.
The Jenkins believe Grace has made a commitment for life.
I'm sorry.
Leaving the organization is not acceptable.
So Clarence and Carmen decided that they wanted Grace Davis to return to the relationship.
She did wrong leaving us. We had a commitment.
They plan to woo back their lover, not with candy or flowers, but with a terrifying message.
Maybe we show Grace how serious we are and what we are capable of. Maybe we do that. And then she's so terrified that she comes running back. That's what we do.
They need a messenger. Clarence finds one on the seedy side of town.
So Nicole is a known prostitute.
34-year-old Nicole Harris is lured into Clarence's van.
He says he's an undercover cop.
You're under arrest.
I'm not hurting anybody.
He told her that if she came along, he wouldn't press charges for her recent prostitution. So she went along with him.
Little did she know, she's stepping into the car with the devil in disguise.
Clarence cooked up an idea to get Grace back that was completely ridiculous.
If Grace thinks the 3-way marriage is bizarre, she won't believe what they will do to win her back.
It is one of the craziest schemes I've ever heard.
Greenville, South Carolina, spring 2008. Clarence and Carmen Jenkins aim to scare their lover, Grace Davis, back into their arms by kidnapping a perfect stranger.
What do you want?
You do as you're told, or you're so busted.
She would have felt vulnerable. She was sitting on a chair, handcuffed in a strange man's house.
Carmen writes to Grace, not a love letter, but a ransom note.
It was about a paragraph long, but it basically said, come back to the organization. This is what happened to people who leave the organization.
They leave Nicole tied up all night. By morning, their bizarre plan is escalating. They will use their prisoner as bait, but not live bait.
Clarence says to Carmen, "You know what you have to do," and he hands her a wire cable.
What are you doing?
Carmen obeys.
I can only imagine the fear that was going through Nicole Harris's head.
Carmen has the will to kill, but not the strength.
Clarence said, "So it takes a man to do this job, huh?"
And he suffocated her to death.
Carmen and Clarence are not finished yet.
He asks Carmen, get the saw, get the knife, chop off her hands, chop off her feet.
Blood would be seeping into the drain, into all the cracks in the grout, and into the sheetrock.
21-year-old Carmen follows her husband's lead.
She thought the sun rose and set on this man, and she would do anything he wanted her to do.
She is responsible for her own actions, and she participated. Lots of women Meet men who are manipulative, and they don't take a saw to another woman's hand and try to cut it off.
The packages are ready. A special delivery for their former lover.
If you don't come back to the organization, this will happen to you.
There's one problem. They don't know where Grace lives. So Carmen leaves the gruesome packages on the doorsteps of Grace's family.
They placed one foot in one hand in a bag along with a note at one location, and then another foot in another hand at a different location.
The organization bungles this job.
So Grace, of course, is not living at either address.
Davis' family at that time had no idea why someone would leave human remains at their doorstep.
Her relatives, they call the cops right away.
The police have McCall Harris's fingerprints on file and quickly identify the remains.
Once we discovered that the remains belonged to Mecole Harris, law enforcement was able to identify a number of individuals who stated that Clarence Jenkins was the last person that was seen with Mecole Harris.
Investigators raid Clarence and Carmen's home and find all the evidence they need.
It was obvious that there had been a murder there. There was blood spatter in the bathroom, which ultimately had the DNA of Mecole Harris.
The evidence is overwhelming. Carmen confesses and testifies against her husband. In 2012, Clarence Jenkins is convicted of the murder of Mecole Harris. He receives life without parole.
Clarence does not care about people. Clarence cares about one thing, and that's his own desires, his own wants, his own needs. And Clarence can rot in jail.
Carmen pleads guilty to murder and will spend 40 years in prison.
Carmen and Clarence didn't even know Mecole. They just grabbed her off the street. This was a terrible murder. This was a despicable act.
Carmen Jenkins, swept up in her husband's cruelty, kills a perfect stranger just to punish the woman she loves.
Carmen had choices in her life, just like we all do. She made the wrong one, and Clarence brought out the worst in her.
Really?
A kind woman offers a helping hand.
I'd known her for so long, and she'd been part of my family.
But a maternal instinct.
A tough, hard, and controlling matriarch
Can mask wicked intentions.
She tortured her. She abused her.
In 2005, Wollongong, Australia.
Here, let me show you the house. It's real nice.
Single mom Kathy McDonald is excited about her new home.
Looks cozy.
Kathy and her teenage daughter Louise need a change after facing tragedy.
My other daughter took her own life. Louise found that hard. She couldn't understand why.
Kathy and Louise are moving closer to their friend, Patricia Goddard. But there is one final hurdle.
Only thing is, I've got to be there in 6 weeks. And that means Louise changing schools mid-term.
Oh. Patricia is only too happy to take Louise in.
Why doesn't Louise come and stay with us?
Oh. Patricia had suggested maybe that Louise come down, start school early in the year. I could continue packing the house up because it was only supposed to be a couple of weeks.
The 67-year-old is like a mother to Kathy. one of the few people she trusts with her daughter.
Louise's mother thought, well, this is fine. A friend of mine will look after her.
Like a holiday.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We were really close, you know. It was just like they were family.
Louise moves in with Patricia. Kathy visits as often as possible, so mother and daughter maintain a close bond.
You there, Princess?
When Louise moved, I would come down and stay the weekend with her.
Oh, I missed you too.
It was a good relationship with Louise. We did a lot of things together.
Louise seems to be settling in.
Oh, aren't we looking after you?
I didn't mean that.
Under Patricia's watchful eye.
Oh, you're being a good girl, yeah?
Sometimes.
I try. I really try.
She was, by all accounts, a pretty tough woman,
Let me just put my things down.
but she was very sweet and endeared herself to a lot of people.
In late 2005, Kathy finally moves into her new home, ready for a fresh start with Louise. But when she goes to pick up her daughter, a family friend isn't welcoming.
Good. How's my girl? She's good. She don't want to see you. What? Why? What's going on? Patricia! You deal with her! What's going on, Patricia?
Come in.
Patricia has said to her, Louise doesn't want to live with you anymore. She wants to stay with us.
Kathy is baffled by her daughter's rejection.
They were saying Louise didn't want to see me. She was supposed to come home. There were plans, the way she was going to paint her room, put a mural on the wall.
She doesn't want to see you or live with you.
I just want to talk to her, please. Louise!
Didn't see much of her. It was just like a fleeting glance.
What happened to her eye?
She got a sty.
There was one time I questioned about a black eye, and I was told that she'd had a sty and she was rubbing it.
But...
Kathy, you gotta go. Go!
I can't imagine what that would have been like for her. This whole experience must have just been absolutely gut-wrenching.
The heartbroken mom hopes the police can bring her daughter home.
And how old's your daughter?
She's just turned 16.
But they are powerless to help.
Mrs. O'Brien, under the law, we can't make Louise come home.
He said that if she's happy, she wants to stay there, she's old enough to make her own mind up. So I virtually had no say in it. Once she was there, she was there. And she didn't come home.
Kathy doesn't know the truth behind her teenager's withdrawal. Louise hasn't decided to stay.
I told you not to come out.
She is not allowed to leave.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, you will be.
Patricia subjected young Louise to horrendous, unspeakable abuse.
Don't yell or I'll make it worse for you.
2006, in the coastal town of Wollongong, Australia. Louise O'Brien is working her fingers to the bone.
She became virtually a servant, a slave, almost from day one. She was being constantly told to do housework.
Family friend Patricia Goddard is meant to be caring for Louise. Instead, she is using the teenager as a workhorse and for easy money.
I think she kept her there because she was getting the money from Louise's dad. She had a slave.
It's almost inexplicable to imagine that somebody could do this for a few $100s a month. Patricia Goddard was just so selfish and so self-absorbed.
The teenager doesn't try and escape. She is too terrified of her captor.
She was very easily pushed around, and I think she really struggled to assert herself in her life. I think she probably was an easy target.
So, did you get that dress you like? Yeah.
Patricia's slave cooks all the meals, but doesn't sit at the table.
She was made to eat out of a dog's dinner bowl.
But Louise was treated worse than a dog.
Eat it. Last chance. Give me the bowl.
When Louise dares to challenge Patricia, the discipline doubles.
She was force-fed, and force-fed some pretty horrible things like tomato sauce with salt and pepper mixed into it.
Need you to waste my food. Come on. Come on, open up.
She was an evil, evil person.
Louise's mother, Kathy, is keen to reunite with her daughter. But when she visits, the teenager is hidden away.
I thought she would be safe with Patricia because I'd known them for so long. I had no reason not to trust them.
Louise lives with Patricia for another 2 years. The persecution grows.
You stole my cigarettes.
Patricia took her hand, placed it over a scalding hot element, and burnt her hand.
She did it because it made her feel powerful and it made her feel good.
Really is quite a sadistic thing to do to another human being.
I never was aware of it. Nobody ever told me that this was going on.
In October 2008, finally some good news. Kathy's daughter has embarked on a new adventure.
And I was told she'd moved out with a boyfriend. And I thought, oh, great, she's got a boyfriend. She moved to Melbourne. She was working in a restaurant, working in the kitchens. She was happy.
Louise hasn't left town. She's much closer than her mother thinks.
What's going on?
Move along, please.
But...
Move along.
On February 28th, 2011, the police respond to a tip-off and search Patricia's home.
That's when I found out that she was buried in Patricia's backyard.
Patricia Goddard is arrested. She claims it was all an accident when she lost her temper.
That's not clean.
After the hammer blow was delivered, Patricia still didn't do the right thing. She didn't get help for Louise.
She was in and out of consciousness. She was dying.
Louise lingered for many, many hours. Patricia started to panic. But I don't think she panicked because she was afraid for Louise dying. She panicked because she was afraid she had committed murder.
After hours of suffering, Louise loses her fight for life.
Get up.
The hit caused her head to rotate at such a degree that it caused a subdural hematoma, and as a result, that's what she died of.
Louise O'Brien's young and painful life was finally ended by a very deadly woman.
Instead of calling the authorities, Patricia calls a friend.
She told the man who dug the hole that the dog was buried in the wheelie bin, not Louise O'Brien, a fellow human being.
Louise's body reveals 3 years of horrific abuse.
When Louise's body was discovered, it was found that she had multiple fractures consistent with hammer blows, not just to her head, but to her shoulders and other parts of her body as well.
Patricia preyed on an innocent girl who couldn't stand up for herself.
I have no doubt that she was targeted because of her gentle soul. There are people who can spot weak and passive people a mile away, and they are deliberately targeted.
In 2012, the 74-year-old pleads guilty to manslaughter. Patricia Goddard is sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison. A year later, nature deals her own penalty.
Patricia Goddard passed away in jail.
It leaves no solace for the woman whose trust she so brutally betrayed.
I was more so upset with the fact that there's no justice because she's not spending the time in jail. She's not there. Yes, she's dead, but so's my daughter.
A bright spark
Sherelle was a very vivacious person.
Can become a lethal flame
She'd go looking for a new thrill
that devours all in its path.
Scott didn't have a clue.
In the farmlands of Canada's Ottawa Valley, 1990, Sherelle and Scott Dell are taking a fresh look at life.
Here, honey.
Thirsty work.
But great, hey?
I love it. And I love you.
Scott and Sherelle got married young, in their teens, and they had 3 kids fairly soon.
What's Eden up to?
They've left the city behind for a more wholesome existence.
Well, she ain't no city kid no more, ain't she?
They decided to come up to the Killaloe area, to a more rural environment. I think a lot of people moved to this area to have a little bit of outdoor living and to get back to nature.
Scott savors the country air. But Sherelle is soon bored with this clean living.
Sherelle was a very vivacious person. She was a very attractive person.
The 33-year-old goes looking for a little excitement, while her husband is left to care for the kids.
Scott was a very nurturing person.
That's my favorite story.
He was a very concerned parent for his 3 children and seems to have been a very kind individual.
Can you guess what Elmo's thinking about? Food.
He was a nice guy. He was a good father to their children, but that wasn't enough for her.
Sherelle makes plenty of new friends.
Hey. I was hoping you'd come over.
I was hoping you'd invite me.
Scott forgave Sherelle numerous indiscretions.
She cheated on him throughout their marriage. He knew it, and he always forgave her.
His forgiveness doesn't entice Sherelle to stay. In 1992, she leaves Scott and the farm behind. By now, sleeping with other men is passé.
I think when Sherelle got what she wanted in life, it wasn't long before she decided she didn't want it, and she'd go looking for a new thrill.
This is a nice surprise.
37-year-old Nancy Fillmore catches her eye.
Nancy Fillmore is actually an interesting person. She had a master's in social work, so she was a very intelligent woman.
While Sherelle finds happiness, her ex-husband is blighted by tragedy.
Scott was actually diagnosed with throat cancer.
Sherelle shows no pity. Instead of standing by Scott in his hour of need, she moves in with her new girlfriend.
I missed you today. I like being missed.
It doesn't dampen Scott's love.
She put him through the ringer, but I mean, he loved her. He loved her throughout.
Even though they were divorced, Scott was still smitten with Sherelle. He would have liked nothing better than to get back together with his ex-wife.
In December 1995, it seems Scott gives up on the chance of a reunion and on himself.
Scott died at Christmas time. At the holidays, many people become depressed. And with the history of throat cancer, with the fact that it was the holidays, most people accepted the fact that he had probably committed suicide.
Before he dies, Scott declares his love for his ex-wife.
Scott wrote down a few thoughts and feelings in his last hours. He told Sherelle how much he missed her, that he wanted to be with her, that he wanted to hold her and make love to her.
Cheryl doesn't seem too moved, but her lover, Nancy, is.
Nancy begins to become increasingly unrattled. She becomes very nervous.
Nancy has a secret. It will change Sherelle's fate, but it will also seal her own.
What she should have done next was get in her car and drive away as far as she could from Sherelle, but she didn't.
The village of Killaloe in Canada's Ottawa Valley, March 1997. For the past year, Nancy Fillmore has been living with a terrible secret, but she can't keep it anymore.
Nancy told police that Sherelle had killed Scott.
It's a plot that starts months earlier, when Sherelle is unhappy with the terms of her divorce.
The divorce settlement left Scott with his farm, and Sherelle got the kids most of the time. She didn't want that. She wanted Scott's farm.
For a while, Sherelle thinks Scott's cancer will ensure that she inherits the farm. But Scott beats the odds.
Sherelle had thought that he finally would be out of her life, but then he wasn't because he had made a recovery.
So Scott had to go.
Sherelle hatches a plan.
Do you love me? Oh, you know I do. Then do something for me.
And convinces Nancy to help.
Nancy was very much in love with Sherelle, it's very obvious, and did what Sherelle wanted.
Just days after Christmas, 1995, Nancy buys a bottle of wine and some antifreeze.
It's a chemical called ethylene glycol that is actually odorless and tasteless. It has a kind of a fluorescent green color.
Nancy watched Sherelle mix the antifreeze in with a bottle of wine.
Hey, it's great to see you again.
Cheryl gives her ex-husband a little Christmas cheer.
Thank you for the gift.
She gave this bottle of wine to her husband as a Christmas present.
I'll call you later. We can talk about that dream.
And she urged him to drink it and think about her while he was drinking.
I can't wait.
Sherelle was always sort of
Either can I.
letting him think that maybe there was the possibility of reconciliation.
Scott returns to the farmhouse with renewed hope.
Hello?
It wasn't enough for Sherelle to give him a bottle of tainted wine. She wanted to make sure he drank it, and then he drank quite a bit of it that night.
Have a drink of that wine I gave you.
Sherelle called him frequently, hourly, encouraging him to drink the wine, to put on the music that they used to listen to when they were in love.
It's good, isn't it?
It's great.
And periodically suggested to him that they might get back together.
As Scott pours out the wine, he also pours out his love.
Scott was taking notes of, his thoughts. He writes about their relationship and about seeing her as an angel.
His angel is doing the devil's work.
How's it going with that wine? I hope you've drunk the whole bottle.
I'm very drunk.
Scott didn't have a clue. The ethylene glycol is sweet. He was drinking wine. Nothing unusual was happening.
As the poison starts to take effect,
Tell me what you're feeling.
Sherelle listens in as her husband of 20 years fades away.
The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning begin at first much like those of alcohol.
I'll call you back later.
A person feels lightheaded and giddy. Their inhibitions are depressed. Sherelle knew that the lethal bottle of wine was starting to take effect. She could hear his words start to slur.
Scott?
Life is a gift. It doesn't last long.
And of course, Sherelle didn't do a thing to save his life.
Scott? You there?
She just allowed him to die.
After revealing everything to the police, Nancy Fillmore will be the star witness at her ex-lover's murder trial. But Sherelle will never let that happen.
Sherelle decided it was time to get rid of Nancy once and for all.
The master manipulator finds a new helper. Naive 16-year-old Brent Crawford.
Brent's parents were divorced, and Brent was having a hard time dealing with the divorce. He was feeling a bit alone in the world. He was looking maybe for some attention, and Sherelle became that someone.
I like bad boys, Brent.
I could be bad.
Sherelle convinces the love-struck teen to do her dirty work.
Sherelle did have the ability to find people that she felt like she could sort of possibly put under her spell. Brent was going to break into Nancy's apartment.
Off you go, bad boy.
And he was going to slit her throat with a knife.
But when he got there, he found her drunk on the floor, and there were candles all around her. So he tipped over all the tables and left, and the house burned down with Nancy in it.
Within the span of less than 2 years, 2 of the people who had been Sherelle's lovers were dead.
It's too much of a coincidence. And when police find out about Sherelle's new boy toy, they organize an undercover sting.
Brent said, yes, I killed a woman. He was trying to brag about what he did.
Brent Crawford is convicted of murder and sentenced to life with no chance of parole.
Brent, Scott, and Nancy are all tragedies in this case that Sherelle manipulated.
In 2001, Sherelle Dell is convicted of the murder of her ex-husband and pleads guilty to counseling Brent Crawford in the murder of Nancy Fillmore.
Sherelle was sentenced to life with no chance of parole for 25 years.
Men and women fall under Sherelle's wicked spell, but the only person she truly loves is herself.
Sherelle is a narcissist. Life is all about her, and image is everything. Scott Dell beat cancer, but he couldn't survive Sherelle.
These deadly women discarded lives like rubbish. Carmen Jenkins sacrificed a stranger to teach her lover a lesson. Patricia Goddard wasn't grandma. She was the big bad wolf. And Sherelle Dell killed the man and woman who loved her. These women didn't care who suffered. They wanted total control. Love can take many forms.
She would do anything he wanted her to do.
But some bonds stray beyond the boundaries.
This relationship between the two of us is great, but wouldn't it be better if we added a third person?
And take forbidden love to a whole new level.
She was sitting on a chair, handcuffed, in a strange man's house.
Carmen wants her husband back at any price. She's even happy to meet his former mistress.
They saw each other at a grocery store.
Oh, hey, I heard you two got back together.
Yeah, he's my
The two women get along so well. Clarence has an idea.
Why don't y'all come live with us?
A total stranger, singled out solely because she is easy prey.
an innocent person. A woman was just plucked off the street, and they decided her life's gonna end today. They played God.
I think he may have even chosen a prostitute to kidnap because he thought nobody would miss her and he could justify killing her. Well, taking out the trash in his mind.
The charred remains of Nicole Harris's body are later found in a child's playpen in remote woods.
So to dispose of the rest of Nicole's body, to defile this woman even while she's dead, right? They take her, or what's left of her, up into the woods, and they pour gasoline over her and light it on fire.
Complications during her birth leave 15-year-old Louise O'Brien struggling.
She had a hard time at school. She'd get bullied because she wasn't mentally where the rest of her peers were.
If Louise doesn't obey, Patricia unleashes her anger.
Patricia took it upon herself to be the disciplinarian for Louise.
There was probably quite a lot of, corporal punishment, and I don't think she was, ashamed to or afraid to meet that out. It's alleged she was ordered to drink from a toilet bowl. So these kinds of very demeaning, very horrific, really, punishments that were inflicted on this teenage girl who'd done nothing more than complain about being made effectively into a slave.
For 2 years, Kathy hasn't seen or spoken to her daughter, but she never loses hope.
I started looking for Louise, checking phone books, looking on the internet, trying to find her. Couldn't find anything of her.
Within weeks of the murder, Nancy gets cold feet.
Sherelle's relationship with Nancy started to go sideways. No small wonder, Nancy knew she was involved with a killer. When she talked to Sherelle about it, Sherelle said, "If you ever tell anyone, you'll be suspected of murdering him as the jealous lover."
Sherelle keeps holding it over Nancy's head that, you're gonna go down for this because I'm gonna say that you were a jealous lover. You were scared I was gonna get back together with Scott, so you poisoned him. And so Nancy's becoming increasingly flustered, worried, and eventually scared for her life.
Sherelle goes on trial for murder.
It had all these sensational elements. There was the lesbian affair, there was the antifreeze poisoning. Just unbelievable. I mean, it is the kind of a thing that you would read in a crime fiction novel.